I found this video completely by accident this morning. It's been a long time and I totally forgot about making it. To tell you the truth, usually I could care less about shit like this, but watching this one, I don't know, somehow it was like a punch in the gut, and I've been thinking about it all day, trying to figure out why. I first met Tien, that's her name, the girl in the video, in rehab a few years before this video was shot. I was in for my depression and morphine addiction. Again, she was in for her bipolar disorder and cocaine addiction. I hate to admit it, but I have been in rehab more than once. We got to know each other a little bit. We didn't escape rehab together or anything like that. But within a year, she ended up living with me. I had a lot of physical pain at that time and still do, so yes, the morphine was by prescription. Although it's been a few years since I've taken any pill. But after a few years hooked on morphine, I pretty much came to the conclusion that the only difference between someone getting their fix scoring on the street and from a doctor was a difference in circumstances and money. I guess I sort of went to sleep for a few years, and even though it looks like I was awake shooting this video, I was pretty much asleep. Both of us were on 6 or 8 different prescriptions at the time, so maybe she was asleep too. At any rate, this was just a typical night of the two of us doing what we did. She liked to dress in lingerie and hang out around the house, which for me was a lot like having one of those things that you hang over your baby's head to keep him entertained sometimes. She reminded me of one of those cats that keeps rubbing your leg while you are fully engaged in doing something else. You sort of think to yourself, yeah, I'll play with the cat later. And sometimes you do, and other times not so much. In fact, for a few years there, Tien and I almost never left the house, which was something I liked about her. Like me, she had seen it all and done it all, and was happy to just slow down and indulge her vices. She wasn't the first pretty girl I've ever been with in my life. There had been a long string of them. I have even been married a few times. Once to a Russian supermodel. So I pretty much knew what the job entailed. Tien wasn't even all that hot, but there was something about her. She's the only woman I ever lived with in such close quarters that I didn't end up having a complete knockdown drag-out with over something or other. I don't ever remember fighting with her. She never complained about my sleeping habits, which could be all day sometimes, and she didn't complain about my eating habits, which at that time could be as few as a couple times a week. At one point, we spent almost a year doing nothing but laying in bed and watching movies that were delivered from Netflix almost daily. If she wanted to eat, I would order a pizza round about dark every night. She spoke English and Chinese, so during that year I learned to speak pretty good Chinese. I didn't ask her to teach me, as that seemed too much. I had some headphones and a Chinese language course on CDs, and I would listen and learn, and if I had any questions, she was right there. At that time, I worked for several major recording labels as an engineer and producer, discovering and developing new artists, and so on. I also owned a recording studio, one of the first computer-based digital studios in Los Angeles, so money really wasn't an object. This allowed me, and in turn her, to indulge ourselves at length. I used to make more money in a day than most people do in a month. I guess I didn't realize how lucky I was. I didn't realize it at the time, as everything had sort of just blurred together in my life, but now as I look back at this time in my life, and at this dark, grainy video, it seems almost magical. She had a habit of constructing what I call altars right in the middle of the living room. And I always knew when it was time for her to go back to the hospital. Whenever the altars got so big, they took over the room entirely. Although I didn't mind that much. In fact, I kind of enjoyed studying them, looking at some kind of significance in them when I knew there wasn't any. This went on for a long time. Then I finally got clean and sober, and she did too, at least for a week or so. And I guess I knew inside that I wasn't going to make it with her around, and she had become uncharacteristically somewhat aggressive towards me and everyone else since I got clean. Maybe because she wasn't. Eventually I had to have the police that she called, yet again for no apparent reason, remove her from the place. I remember her yelling in handcuffs, "I loved you, motherfucker," over and over again as they took her away. It was really sad, though. And I remember saying to her at the time, "I'm a professional. I can't have this at my house or in my life." I didn't see her for a long time after that. Then I started going to pick her up on weekends at her request, as she felt she needed to be serviced with some frequency. She never stayed the night, as she lived with her parents, and even at that age, they didn't want her staying out all night. Like me, they were completely overwhelmed with taking care of her. Pretty soon, the weekend visits dwindled and stopped altogether. The last time I saw her, she called late one night asking if I could come pick her up. She sounded like she was in trouble, so I said sure. She couldn't explain quite where she was, but she did have a cell phone. So I said, text me the GPS coordinates and I'll just follow that. I drove for what seemed like forever into the middle of nowhere when I found this huge open field of nothing but dust right outside of Los Angeles. As I pulled up to her and the headlights lit her up, I saw this gaunt Chinese girl standing all alone right in the middle of this dusty field. It was huge. She was covered in dust. Her long black hair, her face, her oversized down jacket, she was just covered with it. She looked like some ancient mythic warrior that had covered themselves in mud preparing for battle, standing there like that. I was driving a new car and I was even hesitant to let her in, but I did. She had been fighting with her parents and had nowhere to go and asked if I could take her home with me. I had been down that road before and I was doing really well at the time. Clean and sober, productive, so I decided to take her to the nearest motel where we could sit down and talk. And she could get cleaned up. As I pulled into the parking lot of the motel, she said, "Oh, I hate these cheap motels. I've been in so many of them." And then I realized she had figured out, like a lot of women do at some point in their lives, that that thing between her legs was a moneymaker, and she had been using it. And this really broke my heart. And I was overwhelmed with the whole scene, I got to admit. I took her back to her parents and told her it would be a good idea if she apologized to them and stayed there. That was the last time I ever saw her. I don't know what any of this means. I don't know what I could have done any differently. Sometimes you're so busy taking care of yourself and it becomes impossible to take care of someone else, and maybe you shouldn't, but maybe you should. But now, several years later, as an older man, I can't help but look at this video and feel that somehow we were cheated. Only this morning did I realize that I loved her.